What was the craziest way you exposed your greedy boss? My first week as a bank teller, I was counting bills in my drawer when I heard, "Everyone on the ground now!" 3 men in ski masks stormed through the entrance, guns drawn. Everyone dropped to the ground instantly, shaking. The lead robber walked to the counter and pointed his firearm at my pregnant coworker, Sam. "Fill the bags now." She sobbed and reached for the cash drawer. That's when my manager, Mr. Harris, suddenly burst out of his office. "Stop right there, Sam!" he yelled. We all froze. Even the robbers looked confused. "If any of you hand over a single dollar, you're fired. All of you." I stared at him. "Sir, they have guns. And I have the authority to terminate your employment. Touch that money, and you're done." He crossed his arms like he was disciplining a child, not standing 15 feet from 3 loaded AK-47s. The lead robber laughed. "Is this guy serious?" "Mr." Harris glared. "If they walk out here with a single dollar, you're all fired." The robbers weren't laughing anymore. "Old man, you want people to die today?" the lead one said. Mr. Harris stepped back toward his office, the only thing that was bulletproof in the small-town bank. "Go home. We're not handing over anything to you. This is my money and my bank." Sam looked at me with pure terror in her eyes. A woman near the entrance started crying. Her little boy clutched her leg. The second robber walked over to them. "Maybe this'll change your mind." He grabbed the woman by her hair and pressed the gun against her temple. She screamed. Her son started wailing. "Mom! Mom! Do it! What do I care? There will always be more customers," he shouted from behind his office door. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. An elderly man tried to stand up and protect the mother, but the robber just shoved him back down. The old man's head hit the marble floor hard with a sound that made everyone gasp. "Last chance," the lead robber said. "Fill the bags or people start dying." He pointed the gun to the crying boy. "Don't you dare!" Mr. Harris screamed. "I'm warning all of you." The robber pulled back the safety on his gun. The sound echoed in the room. "Wait!" I yelled, standing up with both of my hands raised in the air. My chest pounded hard against my chest. "I'll give you everything. Just let everyone go." The robber howled. "Now we're talking." I took a deep breath and opened up the first register, quickly filling the first bag with cash while our manager screamed in his office. I quickly moved over to the second register, the one that had been assigned to me, and started emptying it out into the bag when my eyes finally found the emergency button near the third register. I glanced at the lead robber nervously, who only told me to hurry it up. When I got to the third register, Mr. Harris yelled, "I see you! Don't you dare press that button, not while they have all my money." My eyes widened, realizing he had thrown us all under the bus. I quickly pressed the alarm button while the robber pointed the gun at my head. "You're fired!" Mr. Harris shrieked from his office. The lead robber's face went red under the ski mask. "What did you just do?" I kept my hands raised, trembling. "Nothing. I didn't do anything." But my voice cracked. He knew. He pressed the gun harder against my forehead. That's when we heard the sirens. His eyes went wide. "She hit the alarm! Grab everything and go!" They started shoving bills into bags frantically, sweeping entire stacks off the counter. Mr. Harris was still screaming about terminations and lawsuits when police cars screeched into the parking lot. The robbers bolted for the back exit, but officers were already pouring in from both sides. "Everyone stay down! Hands where we can see them!" The robbers dropped their bags and hit the floor. That's when Mr. Harris stormed out of his office. "Officer, I need to report an employee who directly violated my orders and put everyone in danger." Every person in the room stared at him. The officer's expression hardened. "Violated your orders?" Mr. Harris straightened his tie like he was about to give a performance review. "I specifically instructed her not to hand over any of the money or trigger alarms. She escalated a manageable situation into a crisis and almost let the robbers get away." "Liar!" the little boy screamed out. "You told them you don't care if my mom got hurt." Other customers started talking all at once, telling officers what he'd said, what he'd done. The lead detective walked over, having heard everything. "Sir, you ordered your employees not to call for help during an armed robbery?" Mr. Harris puffed up his chest. "I was protecting bank assets and following proper loss prevention protocol. These situations resolve themselves if you don't provoke." "Ma'am, did Mr. Harris order you not to call for help?" The officer cut him off and turned to me. I looked at the officer, then back at Mr. Harris, whose face was suddenly pale as realized he was now in hot water. "Help me or you're fired," Mr. Harris was mouthing to me. I looked straight at the officer and my voice came out shaky but clear. "Yes, sir. Mr. Harris told us not to give them any money or press the alarm. He said we'd all be fired if we did." The robber had his gun pointed at that little boy's head, and Mr. Harris still said not to help. The officer wrote everything down while Mr. Harris's face turned bright red across the room. "That's a lie!" Mr. Harris shouted, his voice getting louder with each word. She panicked and made terrible choices under pressure. I was trying to protect everyone by not escalating the situation. She's covering up her own poor judgment. The detective held up his hand toward Mr. Harris without even looking at him. "Sir, you'll get your turn to speak. Ma'am, please continue your statement without interruption." I opened my mouth to keep talking, but Sam stood up from where she'd been sitting on the floor. Her hands were shaking as she touched her pregnant belly. "Everything she said is true. I heard it all too. Mr. Harris yelled from his office that the robbers should shoot us if we touched the money. He said he didn't care what happened to customers because there would always be more. The other teller who worked at the first register nodded so hard her whole body moved. I heard the same thing from where I was on the floor. He told that robber to do it when the gun was pointed at the little boy. The young mother started crying harder, and officers moved closer to write down what she was saying. He said there would always be more customers, like my son didn't matter at all, like we were just numbers he could replace. Her boy was still holding onto her leg and buried his face against her when she talked. Several officers looked at each other with dark expressions and kept taking notes in their little books. Mr. Harris's face changed from red to white like someone had drained all the blood out of him. His eyes moved from person to person as he realized everyone in the bank was saying the same thing. No, you're all misunderstanding. I received crisis management training years ago. The protocol is to avoid provoking armed suspects. I was trying to de-escalate the situation using proven techniques. His voice got quieter and faster, like he knew nobody believed him anymore. The lead detective walked over to Mr. Harris and spoke in a calm voice that somehow sounded scarier than yelling. Sir, I need you to step outside with me for a separate interview. 2 other officers moved to stand on either side of Mr. Harris. I watched through the big front window as they walked him across the parking lot toward a patrol car. He wasn't in handcuffs, but the way the officers stayed close to him made it clear he wasn't just a regular witness anymore. Paramedics came through the door carrying big bags of medical equipment. They went straight to the elderly man who was still sitting on the floor where the robber had shoved him. Sir, we need to check that head injury. Can you tell me your name? The old man waved his hand like he was fine. I'm Mr. Smithon, and I don't need all this fuss. Just got knocked down is all. But he let them shine a light in his eyes and check the back of his head anyway. Mr. Smithon pointed at me while the paramedic was looking at his pupils. That young lady right there is the brave one. She saved every person in this building. I had to sit down right then because my legs felt like they couldn't hold me up anymore. I grabbed the edge of the counter and lowered myself to the floor. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going just disappeared all at once. My hands were shaking, so bad I had to hold them together. My whole body trembled like I was freezing even though the bank was warm. One of the officers noticed and went to the break room. He came back with a bottle of water and twisted the cap off before handing it to me. Here you go. Adrenaline crash is normal after something like this. Sam sat down on the floor next to me and took my hand in both of hers. She squeezed it tight and leaned close to whisper. I can't believe you stood up to both the robbers and Mr. Harris. You had a gun to your head and he was screaming that you'd be fired and you still did it. Her voice cracked when she talked. If you hadn't pressed that button, I don't know what would have happened to me or my baby. The lead detective came back inside and walked over to where Sam and I were sitting on the floor. He crouched down so he was at eye level with us. Ma'am, I know this has been extremely difficult, but I need to ask if you're okay to answer some more detailed questions. We need your complete statement while everything is still fresh in your mind. I nodded and tried to say yes, but my voice came out sounding weird and far away like it belonged to someone else. I can do that. The detective helped me stand up and guided me to one of the chairs customers usually sat in when they were opening accounts. The detective pulled out a small black recording device and set it on the table between us. He pressed a button and a red light came on. He asked me to state my full name and the date for the record, then started walking me through everything that happened from the very beginning. I told him about counting money at my station when the robbers came in, about everyone hitting the floor, about the lead robber pointing his gun at Sam. My voice shook when I described Mr. Harris bursting out of his office and threatening to fire anyone who handed over money. The detective stopped me there and asked me to repeat Harris's exact words. I closed my eyes and heard it all over again in my head. I told him Harris said we'd all be fired if we gave them a single dollar, that he had the authority to end our jobs right there. The detective asked if Harris knew the robbers had guns, and I said yes, he was looking right at them. We went through the whole thing piece by piece. The detective kept asking me to clarify what Harris said when the robber grabbed the young mother by her hair. I repeated those awful words about there always being more customers, about not caring what happened. The detective had me say it 3 times to make sure he had it recorded correctly. He asked about when Harris yelled at me not to press the alarm button, and I explained how he screamed that I was fired the second I pushed it. The detective wanted to know if Harris ever told us to cooperate with the robbers or protect ourselves, and I said no. He only cared about the money staying in the bank. The whole statement took over an hour because the detective kept going back to specific moments and asking for more details. My throat felt dry from talking so much and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we finally finished, the detective turned off the recorder and looked at me with this serious expression. He explained that what the robbers did was obviously a crime, but Harris's conduct during the robbery would be looked at separately. He said the bank's corporate office had already been called, and they were sending people to investigate what happened. The detective pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. He told me to call him right away if Harris tried to punish me or fire me or make my job harder because of what I did today. He said retaliation against someone who called police during a crime was illegal, and he'd make sure Harris faced consequences if he tried anything. I put the card in my pocket and thanked him, though I was pretty sure I'd already been fired based on Harris screaming it at me multiple times. The detective went to interview other people, and I just sat there feeling numb and trying to process everything. I watched through the window as more police cars arrived and officers talked to witnesses in the parking lot. Then 2 people in business suits walked through the front door moving fast like they were on a mission. The woman had dark hair pulled back tight and carried a leather folder under her arm. The man with her looked older and kept glancing around the bank like he was taking notes in his head. They went straight to one of the officers and showed identification. Then the officer pointed toward where I was sitting. The woman walked over and introduced herself as Kira Ferguson from the bank's crisis management team. She shook my hand with a firm grip and said she needed to interview every employee who was here during the robbery. I was surprised they got here so fast. Less than 2 hours after everything happened. Kira asked if there was a private room we could use, and I showed her to the small conference room we used for customer meetings. She asked me to wait outside while she set up, and I watched her arrange papers and open her laptop. When she called me back in, she had a legal pad ready and asked me to start from the beginning. I went through the whole story again, and this time I could see Kira's face change as I described what Harris did. Her professional expression cracked when I told her about Harris saying he didn't care if customers died. She wrote faster when I explained how he threatened to fire me while I had a gun pressed to my forehead. Kira asked careful questions about whether Harris ever showed concern for anyone's safety, and I told her honestly that he seemed only worried about the money. She took pages and pages of notes and kept circling back to specific things Harris said. When I finished, Kira closed her notebook and looked at me directly. She said the company takes employee safety very seriously, and what I described was deeply concerning. But I noticed she didn't actually promise anything about my job or say I'd be protected. She thanked me for my honesty and said she'd be interviewing everyone else who was here. Then Kira's expression softened a little, and she told me I was placed on paid administrative leave starting right now. My chest got tight and I felt panic rising because that sounded like a nice way of saying I was fired. Kira must have seen my face change because she quickly explained this was standard after traumatic incidents. She said I should go home and rest and that the bank had an employee assistance program that included free counseling sessions. She wrote down a phone number for me to call and said I could take as much time as I needed. I walked out of the conference room feeling like my legs might give out. The bank lobby was empty now except for employees giving statements and police finishing up their investigation. Someone announced the bank would be closed for the rest of the day, which made sense since there was still cash scattered on the floor from when the robbers dropped their bags. I grabbed my purse from under my station and realized my hands were shaking too much to trust myself driving home. I pulled out my phone and called my roommate, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked if she could come get me. She said she'd be there as fast as she could. I waited in the parking lot, sitting on the curb because standing felt like too much work. My roommate's car pulled in 20 minutes later and she jumped out before it was fully stopped. She ran over and wrapped her arms around me so tight I could barely breathe. I felt tears starting, but I pushed them down because if I started crying in this parking lot, I might never stop. She helped me into the passenger seat and drove me home without asking a million questions, which I was grateful for. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, exhausted but unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lead robber's face behind that ski mask and felt the cold metal of the gun against my forehead. I heard Harris screaming that I was fired, over and over like a recording stuck on repeat. Around midnight, I gave up and went to the living room where my roommate was still awake. She took one look at me and pulled up Netflix without saying anything. We watched stupid comedy shows until the sun came up, neither of us really laughing, but both of us needing something light and meaningless to focus on. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before I was fully awake. Text after text came through from coworkers asking if I was okay and telling me what they'd heard. 3 different people sent messages saying Harris had been suspended while corporate investigated everything. Sam sent a long text thanking me for what I did and saying her husband wanted to take me out to dinner to show how grateful they were that I protected her and the baby. I responded to a few messages, but mostly I just felt tired and overwhelmed. Then my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman's voice said she was calling from the local newspaper about the bank robbery. She asked if I would be willing to do an interview about what happened and share my side of the story. I told her I wasn't ready to talk publicly, and I didn't know what I was legally allowed to say anyway. She thanked me and hung up. The next day, the story ran in the paper anyway with details from police reports and quotes from witnesses who were there. 3 days went by in a blur of sleeping too much, staring at walls and trying not to think about everything. Then Kira called my cell and asked if I could come to the main branch downtown for a follow-up meeting. Her voice sounded carefully neutral. Not friendly, but not angry either. Just professional and distant. I agreed to come and spent the entire drive convinced this was when they'd officially fire me. I kept thinking about how I'd only had this job for a week. How I'd done the right thing, but maybe that didn't matter. How Harris had screamed I was fired and maybe corporate would back him up to avoid problems. I parked outside the big downtown branch and sat in my car for 5 minutes trying to calm down before walking inside. The downtown branch, a much bigger building than my small branch, had glass doors and fancy stone columns that made me feel even more nervous about this meeting. I walked through the entrance and told the person at the front desk who I was there to see. She made a quick phone call and then pointed me toward the elevators, saying Kira was waiting on the 3rd floor. The elevator ride felt like it took forever, even though it was probably only 30 seconds. When the doors opened, Kira was standing right there in the hallway wearing a business suit and holding a folder. She shook my hand and led me to a conference room where Elias was already sitting at a long table. He stood up when I entered and his face looked serious but not angry. Kira closed the door and they both sat across from me. Elias started talking first, thanking me for coming in and saying he wanted to discuss everything that happened during the robbery. My stomach felt tight because I still thought this might be when they fired me despite what everyone said. But then Elias said something I never expected. He told me I showed real courage and quick thinking when I pressed that alarm, and that action let police arrive before anyone got seriously hurt or killed. Kira nodded and added that their investigation found Harris broke multiple company rules and maybe even some laws about keeping employees and customers safe. Elias said Harris was fired right away for putting everyone in danger and then trying to blame me for saving lives. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me because I realized they actually understood what happened. Then Elias offered me my job back with a note in my file about doing something good, plus a bonus for my actions. He said the bank wants workers who care about keeping people safe more than protecting money, which was the total opposite of what Harris screamed at me. I said yes to the job, but admitted I felt scared about going back to that same building after everything. Elias nodded like he got it and said I could work at a different location if I wanted, or take more time off to deal with the hard feelings before deciding. I told him I needed to think about it and he said that was fine. The meeting ended and I drove home feeling like maybe things would actually be okay. A few days later, I was scrolling through social media when I got a message request from someone I didn't know. I almost ignored it, but something made me click on it. The message was from the young mother who was in the bank during the robbery, the one whose son almost got hurt. She said she found my profile through a mutual friend and hoped it was okay to reach out. She wrote this really long message about how she thinks about what could have happened every single day and how grateful she is that I was brave enough to act when Harris told everyone not to help. She attached a photo of her little boy holding a card he made with crayons. The card had stick figures and said thank you in big letters with some of the letters backward. I stared at that photo for a long time and started crying, which surprised me because I thought I was done crying about all this. Her message made everything feel real in a different way, like I could see the actual result of pressing that button. I wrote back thanking her and saying I was just glad everyone was safe. She responded right away saying her son asks about the brave bank lady sometimes, and she wanted me to know that what I did mattered. I saved that photo on my phone and looked at it whenever I felt scared or unsure about everything that happened. 2 weeks after the robbery, I had another session with Layla where we talked about my options for going back to work. She asked if I'd thought about which branch I wanted to work at, the original one or somewhere new. I told her I kept going back and forth because part of me wanted to avoid that building forever, but another part of me felt like running away would make the fear win. Layla said something that stuck with me. She explained that facing the place where bad things happened can actually help with healing sometimes, like proving to yourself that you can handle being there without falling apart. She also said there's no wrong choice and I should do whatever feels right for me. I thought about it for a few more days and finally decided I wanted to go back to my original branch. I called Kira and told her my decision. She sounded surprised but said she respected my choice and would make sure everything was ready for my return. My roommate thought I was crazy when I told her, but she also said she was proud of me for being tough. My first day back at work felt strange from the moment I walked through the door. Everything looked the same, but also completely different because now I knew what could happen in this normal-looking bank. I kept glancing at the spot near the entrance where the robbers stood, and at the register where I pressed the alarm button. My hands shook a little when I logged into my computer, and I had to take some deep breaths to calm down. Sam came over and gave me a hug, saying she was so happy I came back. She looked more pregnant than before, and I asked how she was feeling. She said the baby was doing good, but she still had nightmares about that day sometimes. Having her there helped because we went through the whole thing together, and she understood without me having to explain. The other tellers were really nice too, checking on me throughout the day and not making a big deal when I needed a minute to collect myself. By lunchtime, I felt a little more normal, though I still jumped when the door opened suddenly. I made it through the whole shift without breaking down, which felt like a small victory. The bank looked different in some important ways when I came back. Kira had mentioned changes, but I didn't realize how many until I saw them. Every single teller station now had a panic button right where we could reach it easily, not just one button at the third register like before. There were new cameras in different spots, and a security guard who walked around during business hours. The biggest change was this thick glass barrier that went up between the teller area and the customer area, with small openings to pass things through. It made the space feel more like a serious bank instead of a small town place where everyone knew each other. Elias came by personally about a week after I returned to show us all the new safety rules and answer questions. He walked around pointing out each change and explaining why they made it. He also said every employee had to go through training about what to do during robberies, and the new rule was crystal clear that protecting human lives always came before protecting money. No manager could ever tell us not to help again. Elias looked at me when he said that part, and I felt this mix of sad and relieved. Sad that it took something so scary to make these changes happen, but relieved that maybe the next person wouldn't have to choose between their job and doing the right thing. During my next session with Layla, I finally admitted something I'd been holding inside. I told her I was really mad at Harris for putting everyone in danger and then trying to make it all my fault when I saved lives. The anger surprised me because I thought I was just scared and shaken up, but underneath all that was this burning feeling about how wrong he was. Layla listened and then asked me to talk more about the anger, like where I felt it in my body and what made it stronger. I explained that every time I remembered him screaming from his safe office while that gun was against my head, I wanted to scream back at him. Every time I thought about him trying to get me fired for pressing the alarm, I felt this heat in my chest. Layla nodded and said anger was a totally normal response to what happened. She helped me see that being mad at Harris didn't make me a bad person. It made me human. She also said something that really helped. She explained that Harris's actions showed who he was as a person, not anything about my worth or value. His choices to care more about money than people, his choice to hide in his office, his choice to blame me afterward, those all reflected his character and had nothing to do with me being wrong. We worked on ways to process the anger without letting it take over my life, like writing down my feelings or talking about them instead of pushing them away. 3 weeks after the robbery, my phone rang with Harvey's number on the screen. I answered and he got straight to the point. He said the bank's insurance company wanted to offer me a settlement for the hard experience I went through because of Harris's actions. I asked how much, and when he told me the number, I had to sit down. It was enough money to pay for all my therapy sessions with Layla, replace my old car that barely ran anymore, and still have a good amount left over for savings. Harvey explained that settlements like this happen sometimes when companies wanted to avoid long court cases, and the insurance company probably realized I had a really strong case if we went to trial. He said the offer included some legal words and conditions that we needed to talk through before I made any decisions. I told him I wanted to meet in person to discuss everything because this felt too big to handle over the phone. We set up a time to meet at his office the next day. Harvey's office was in a small building downtown with old carpet and walls covered in law books. He had me sit across from his desk and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He went through the settlement offer page by page, explaining what each section meant in normal words instead of legal talk. The part that worried me most was something called a non-disparagement clause. Harvey saw my face and explained that it basically meant I couldn't go around publicly trashing the bank or saying bad things about them in the media. But he also said it didn't stop me from being honest if someone asked me directly what happened, and it didn't prevent me from talking to lawyers or government people if they investigated anything. He said the bank was mostly trying to avoid me doing interviews where I made them look terrible, which seemed fair since they actually fired Harris and made all those safety changes. Harvey told me his honest opinion was that I should accept the settlement. He explained that if we went to court instead, it could take years and cost a lot in legal fees. Plus, there was no promise we'd win or get more money than this offer. He said sometimes the smart choice was taking a good settlement and moving on instead of spending years fighting. I asked if I could think about it for a few days, and he said absolutely. This was a big decision, and I should take my time. I talked to Layla about the settlement during our next session. She asked how I felt about accepting it, and I admitted I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to fight and make sure everyone knew exactly what Harris did, but another part of me just wanted to move forward and stop thinking about that day all the time. Layla asked what would help me heal more, spending years in court battles or accepting the money and focusing on my recovery. When she put it that way, the answer felt more clear. That night, I also talked to my roommate about it while we ate pizza on the couch. She said the money could change my life in real ways, like finally having savings and not worrying about my car breaking down. She also pointed out that I already got some justice because Harris was fired and the bank changed their rules. Going to court wouldn't bring back the time or undo the trauma. After talking it through with both of them, I called Harvey and said I wanted to accept the settlement. He said he'd negotiate a few small changes to make the agreement better, then send me the final version to sign. 3 weeks after the robbery happened, I sat in Harvey's office and signed my name on all the papers. My hand shook a little, but I got through it. Harvey shook my hand and said I made a smart choice. Walking out of his office, I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness, like I was closing a door on something awful, but also saying goodbye to the idea of perfect justice. The settlement money hit my bank account a week later, and seeing that number made everything feel unreal. I'd never had that much money at once in my entire life. For the first few days, I barely told anyone because I didn't want people treating me different, or thinking I somehow won the lottery from getting traumatized. My roommate knew, obviously, and Layla knew because we talked about it in therapy. But I kept it quiet at work and with most friends. The money helped in practical ways right away. I paid Layla's therapy bills without worrying about the cost. I went to a car dealership and bought a reliable used car that actually started every time without weird noises. I put a big chunk in savings, so I'd have something to fall back on if things went wrong. But having the money also felt complicated because it came from the worst day of my life. Sometimes I looked at my new car or my savings account and felt grateful, then immediately felt guilty for feeling grateful about anything connected to that robbery. Layla helped me work through those mixed-up feelings, explaining that accepting good things that came from bad situations didn't mean I was glad the bad thing happened. The financial security did help reduce my stress, though, which made the healing process a little easier. I didn't have to worry about making rent or affording therapy, or my car breaking down on top of everything else. About a month after I came back to work, Mr. Smithen walked into the bank carrying a plastic container. I recognized him right away as the older man who tried to protect the young mother and got shoved down. He walked straight to my station and smiled. He said he'd been meaning to stop by and thank me in person for what I did that day. He put the container on the counter and said his wife made cookies because they wanted to show how grateful they were. I felt my eyes get watery but managed not to cry. Mr. Smithen said he recovered totally from hitting his head, and the doctors cleared him without any lasting problems. He also said something that stuck with me. He told me my courage that day inspired him, made him think about what really matters and how regular people can do brave things when it counts. We talked for a few more minutes and he asked how I was doing. I told him honestly that some days were harder than others, but I was working on it. He nodded like he understood and said healing takes time. Before he left, he made me promise to enjoy the cookies and said his wife would want to know I liked them. After he walked out, I opened the container and saw chocolate chip cookies that smelled amazing. I shared them with Sam and the other tellers during our break, and somehow eating those cookies made me feel a little more connected to something good that came out of everything bad. A few days later, Sam asked if we could talk during our lunch break. We walked to the small break room in the back and she closed the door behind us. She looked tired and her hands were shaking a little as she sat down across from me. She told me she was taking her maternity leave earlier than she'd planned because the stress from the robbery was affecting her pregnancy. Her doctor said her blood pressure was too high and she needed to rest more. I felt my chest get tight because I knew the robbery caused this. She must have seen it on my face because she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. She said she was grateful I was there that day and that I saved her and her baby. She told me not to blame myself for any of this because Harris was the one who put everyone in danger. We hugged before she left and I promised to visit her once the baby came. Watching her walk out of the bank that afternoon made me realize how many people were still dealing with what happened, even though the robbers were gone. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from someone at the prosecutor's office. She introduced herself and explained that one of the robbers took a plea deal to reduce his sentence. Part of his deal included giving testimony about what happened during the robbery. She said his lawyer told them about Harris's behavior and how it made everything more dangerous. The prosecutor wanted me to know that this testimony might be used if they decided to file any criminal charges against Harris for what he did. She asked if I'd be willing to talk to them about it, and I said yes without thinking too hard about it. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone for a while trying to process what she'd just told me. The idea that Harris might actually face criminal charges felt both scary and right at the same time. A month after the robbery happened, I got another call from the district attorney's office. A different person this time who sounded more official and serious. He told me they were reviewing whether Harris's actions during the robbery counted as criminal negligence or reckless endangerment. He explained that ordering employees not to call for help while people were being threatened with guns might be against the law. He asked if I would be willing to testify if they decided to file charges. I told him I would testify without any hesitation. He thanked me and said they'd let me know what they decided to do. After that call, I felt weird for the rest of the day. Part of me wanted Harris to face consequences, but another part of me didn't want to relive everything in a courtroom. My next session with Layla focused on working through my mixed-up feelings about potentially testifying. I told her I was scared about being in front of a courtroom with everyone watching me. I worried about having to describe the gun against my head, and Harris screaming while people were in danger. Layla helped me understand that these fears were normal, and that we could prepare for the possibility together. She taught me some techniques for staying calm when talking about hard things. She also reminded me that testifying would be about telling the truth, not about getting revenge or being a hero. We spent the whole session just talking through different scenarios and how I might handle them. By the end, I felt a little better, but still nervous about what might happen. 2 weeks after that, Elias showed up at the bank during my shift. He asked if I could step into the manager's office for a few minutes. My stomach dropped because I thought maybe something was wrong. But when we sat down, he smiled and told me the bank was promoting me to senior teller with a raise. He said my performance during the robbery showed leadership qualities and good judgment under pressure. He explained that they needed people who could train others and set a good example for how to handle difficult situations. I thanked him and tried not to cry right there in the office. After he left, I felt proud, but also like I didn't deserve it since I was so new to banking. The imposter syndrome hit me hard, and I kept thinking about how I'd only been working there a few weeks when everything happened. The promotion came with new responsibilities, including training new employees. My first training session was about safety protocols and what to do during emergencies. I felt nervous standing in front of 3 new hires trying to explain procedures I'd barely learned myself. But when I started sharing what happened during the robbery and how important it was to prioritize human safety over money, something shifted. Talking about my experience in this controlled way where I could help other people learn from it made everything feel more purposeful. The new employees asked good questions and seemed to really understand why these protocols mattered. Teaching them gave me a sense that my worst day could actually help protect other people in the future. After that first training session, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd turned my trauma into something useful. A mutual friend contacted me saying that Harris's wife wanted to meet with me to apologize for what her husband did. The message was polite and said she understood if I didn't want to, but she hoped I'd consider it. I thought about it for maybe 5 minutes before deciding no. I didn't owe her anything, and meeting her would probably just make me feel worse. Layla had talked about setting boundaries and protecting my healing progress. This felt like an obvious boundary to set. I sent a polite message back declining the meeting but thanking her for reaching out. I felt good about that decision and didn't regret it at all. The district attorney called again about 6 weeks after the robbery. He told me they'd decided not to file criminal charges against Harris. He explained that proving criminal intent versus just really bad judgment was too difficult. They didn't think they could convince a jury beyond reasonable doubt that Harris meant to endanger people versus just being catastrophically stupid about how to handle the situation. I felt disappointed hearing that news. It seemed wrong that Harris could do what he did and not face criminal consequences. I called Harvey to talk about it, and he reminded me that Harris lost his job and I got my settlement. He said sometimes civil accountability through termination and money was the only realistic justice available. That helped me feel a little better, but I still wished Harris had to face a judge. 3 months after the robbery, I realized I'd gone a whole week without nightmares. I also didn't have any panic attacks when I heard loud noises like car doors slamming or people yelling. I mentioned this to Layla during our session, and she actually celebrated with me. She brought out these little chocolate candies she kept in her desk, and we ate them while talking about my progress. She reminded me that healing wasn't about never having bad days again. It was about the bad days becoming less frequent and less intense. She said some people think recovery means going back to exactly how you were before, but really it means learning to live with what happened while still moving forward. That made sense to me and helped me appreciate how far I'd come, even though I still had hard moments sometimes. Sam sent me a text with a photo attached. When I opened it, I saw her in a hospital bed holding a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The message said she'd had her baby girl and wanted me to know something important. She wrote that she was naming me as godmother because I protected her and her child when it mattered most. She said she'd never forget what I did that day, and she wanted her daughter to grow up knowing about the brave person who saved them. I started crying right there at my teller station. These were the first happy tears I'd cried since the robbery happened. Everything else had been scared tears, or angry tears, or just overwhelmed tears. But these were different. These tears came from feeling honored and loved, and like maybe all the hard stuff had been worth something after all. A few days after Sam sent me that hospital photo, I drove to her house to meet the baby in person. She opened the door looking tired but happy, and led me inside where her husband was holding their daughter. The baby was so tiny, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket with her little fingers curled up near her face. Sam's husband carefully placed her in my arms, and I felt this wave of emotion wash over me as I looked down at her peaceful sleeping face. This little person was here partly because I pressed that alarm button. If things had gone differently that day, Sam might have lost her baby from the stress or worse. Holding her daughter felt like proof that my choice mattered in a real, living way. Sam's husband smiled and said they'd been talking about middle names. He joked that they should name her something like Grace Brave Anderson, putting Brave right there in the middle to honor what I did. We all laughed, but I could tell he was partly serious about wanting to remember that day through his daughter's name. I stayed for about an hour, just sitting with them and talking about normal new parent stuff like sleep schedules and feeding times. When I left, I felt this deep sense of peace that I hadn't experienced since before the robbery happened. The following week, the local newspaper ran a big follow-up story about what happened at the bank. The headline was something about new safety rules and better training for employees. I bought a copy at the gas station and read it in my car before driving to work. The article talked about all the changes the bank made after the robbery, including the panic buttons at every station, and the new policy that employee safety comes before money. What really caught my attention was a section with anonymous quotes from bank workers praising the improvements. One quote said the new protocols made employees feel valued and protected instead of disposable. I recognized those exact words because I had said them during an interview with the corporate team a few weeks earlier. Another quote talked about how the changes showed the bank learned from what went wrong. That was my phrasing too, almost word for word. Seeing my own thoughts in print like that, knowing other people were reading them and maybe feeling safer because of the changes, made me feel proud. Something good actually came from that terrible day. The article ended by mentioning that other bank branches in the region were adopting similar safety measures. I folded the newspaper carefully and kept it in my apartment, thinking maybe someday I'd want to remember this part of the story too. Harvey called me about a month later and said he had good news. He asked if I could stop by his office to pick up some final paperwork. When I got there, he handed me a thick envelope and explained that this officially closed my case. Inside was a letter summarizing everything we accomplished together. It listed Harris's firing, my settlement amount, and all the policy changes the bank made. Harvey had written a personal note at the bottom saying that cases like mine, where institutions actually respond the right way and make real changes, are much rarer than they should be. He said most of the time companies fight back and try to protect bad managers, but this bank chose to do the right thing. Reading his summary made me realize how much had actually changed in just a few months. Harris was gone. I had money to cover my therapy and other expenses. The bank fixed its safety problems. Other employees were safer now because of what happened. Harvey shook my hand and told me I should be proud of how I handled everything. He said a lot of people in my situation would have just quit and tried to forget about it, but I stood up for myself and for other workers. After I left his office, I sat in my car for a while just processing everything. This chapter of my life was actually closing in a good way. Around that same time, I started dating someone I met through mutual friends at a barbecue. He was nice and easy to talk to, and we went out a few times before things got more serious. But I kept feeling nervous about when to tell him about the robbery. It was such a big part of my recent life, and I didn't want him to think I was damaged or too intense. After we'd been seeing each other for about 3 weeks, I decided I needed to just tell him the whole story. We were having dinner at a quiet restaurant when I brought it up. I started by saying I needed to share something important that happened to me earlier that year. Then I told him everything, from the robbers coming into Harris's threats to pressing the alarm with a gun to my head. He listened really carefully without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said that hearing about what I went through made him admire my courage even more. He said a lot of people talk about doing the right thing, but I actually did it when it mattered most. His response made me feel so relieved and accepted. I'd been worried he might think I was too much to deal with, but instead he saw my experience as something that showed my character. We kept dating after that, and not having to hide this huge part of my life from him made everything feel more real and honest. 6 months after the robbery happened, the bank held a big employee recognition ceremony at their main downtown location. Elias had called me a week earlier to tell me I was receiving an award, and I needed to be there. I felt nervous about being in front of everyone, but I also knew this was important. The ceremony was in a large conference room with maybe 70 or 80 employees from different branches. There were awards for different things like customer service and sales goals. When they called my name for the Courage and Safety Award, I walked up to the stage on shaky legs. Elias handed me a framed certificate and a small crystal trophy while everyone clapped. He said a few words about how I put customer safety first during a dangerous situation and showed the kind of judgment the bank wanted all employees to have. Standing there looking out at all those faces clapping for me felt completely surreal. Just 6 months ago, I'd been a scared new employee with a gun to my head, and now I was honored in front of the whole company. The moment felt deeply meaningful, like proof that doing the right thing actually mattered and people recognized it. After the ceremony, several employees I didn't know came up to thank me and say they felt safer at work because of the changes that came from what happened. Their words made me realize my experience had ripples that reached further than I'd understood. Right after the ceremony ended, Elias pulled me aside near the refreshment table. He had this excited look on his face as he told me about a new project the bank was working on. Corporate headquarters was developing a training program for all employees across the country, based on what happened at our branch. He said they wanted my input on the curriculum, because I had lived through the situation and understood what employees actually needed to know. The opportunity felt huge. Instead of just my branch changing, I could help shape how hundreds of branches trained their workers. Elias explained that the training would cover safety protocols, supporting coworkers during emergencies, and recognizing when authority figures are making dangerous choices. He asked if I'd be willing to work with their training development team over the next few weeks. I agreed immediately, even though I felt nervous about my ability to contribute something useful. He gave me the contact information for the team leader and said they'd reach out soon to set up meetings. Walking to my car after the ceremony, I kept thinking about how this was real impact, not just fixing what went wrong at one location, but potentially protecting workers everywhere in the company. Over the next several weeks, I met with the training development team 4 different times. They asked me detailed questions about what happened, how I felt during the robbery, what information would have helped me beforehand, and what I wished other employees understood about crisis situations. I shared my perspective on everything from the physical panic buttons to the emotional support coworkers need during trauma. One meeting focused entirely on the part about recognizing bad leadership. I explained how Harris's orders put everyone in danger, and how hard it was to go against a manager's direct commands, even when those commands were wrong. The team took pages of notes and asked me to review draft materials they were creating. Seeing my experience turned into training slides and discussion questions felt strange but important. 3 months after those meetings started, the program officially launched across the entire bank network. Elias sent me a copy of the final training package, and right there in the case study section was my story. They'd changed some details to protect privacy, but it was clearly about what happened. The training materials emphasized that employee safety always comes first, and that workers have the right to call for help even if managers say otherwise. Knowing that thousands of bank employees would learn from what I went through gave me this sense of purpose that helped balance out the trauma of the original experience. During one of my regular therapy sessions with Layla, she told me she thought I'd made really significant progress over the past several months. We'd been meeting every week since right after the robbery, and she said my symptoms had improved dramatically. The nightmares were mostly gone. I didn't panic at loud noises anymore. I could talk about what happened without falling apart. She suggested we reduce our sessions to just monthly check-ins instead of weekly appointments. Part of me felt scared about not having that weekly support, but another part felt proud that I'd healed enough to need less help. Layla reminded me that trauma recovery is ongoing and not always linear. She said I might still have hard days or weeks, and that was completely normal. The important thing was that I now had tools to handle those difficult moments, and I could always come back for more frequent sessions if I needed additional support. We scheduled our next appointment for 4 weeks out instead of 1 week. Leaving her office that day, I felt this mix of accomplishment and nervousness about managing on my own more. But I also trusted that I'd built a strong enough foundation to handle whatever came next. Sam came back from maternity leave about 7 months after having her baby. I was so happy to see her walk through the bank doors on her first morning back. We hugged, and she showed me about 50 new photos of her daughter on her phone. Working together again felt comfortable and familiar, like putting on a favorite old sweater. But our friendship had changed and deepened because of what we went through together. During our breaks, we'd share baby photos and talk about normal life stuff. But we also had this bond that went way deeper than typical coworker relationships. One afternoon, during a quiet moment, Sam told me that having me at work made her feel safer. She said knowing I was there, knowing I'd already proven I would protect people when it mattered, gave her peace of mind she didn't have before. Her words touched me deeply because I'd sometimes worried that seeing me might remind her of the trauma. But instead, my presence actually helped her feel secure. We fell back into our comfortable work rhythm easily, covering for each other during busy times and chatting between customers. Having her back made the bank feel more like home again, and I realized how much I'd missed working alongside her every day. The 1-year anniversary of the robbery arrived on a Tuesday. I'd been thinking about that date for weeks, unsure how I'd feel when it came. I decided to take the day off work rather than spending it at the bank where everything happened. But I didn't want to just sit at home dwelling on the trauma and replaying those terrible moments in my mind. Instead, I signed up to volunteer at a local women's shelter that had been looking for people to teach workshops. I drove there that morning and met with their volunteer coordinator, who seemed excited that someone with my background wanted to help. I spent 3 hours teaching a workshop on workplace safety and standing up for yourself in difficult situations. About 12 women attended, and I shared my story along with practical advice about trusting your instincts, knowing your rights, and not letting authority figures bully you into unsafe choices. Several women came up afterward to thank me and share their own stories of workplace problems. One woman said she'd been afraid to report her boss for creating dangerous conditions, but hearing my experience gave her courage to file a complaint. Another woman asked for advice about a situation at her job where she felt pressured to do things that seemed wrong. Being able to help these women, to turn my worst experience into something useful for others, made the anniversary feel meaningful instead of just painful. Driving home that evening, I felt tired but good. I'd taken a day that could have been about fear and trauma and turned it into something positive that might actually protect other people. A few months after the anniversary, I got called into a meeting with the regional director. He offered me a promotion to assistant branch manager at a different location across town, and I accepted without hesitation, because it felt like the right time to move forward. The new branch was bigger and had way better security features, including cameras everywhere, reinforced glass, and multiple panic buttons at every station. My new manager was this calm woman who spent my first day showing me around and explaining that employee safety was her top priority, which made me feel relieved after everything with Harris. I started my new role by meeting with each team member individually to learn about their concerns and ideas, and several of them mentioned feeling nervous about robberies after hearing what happened at my old branch. I spent the next few weeks implementing additional safety measures I'd learned from my experience, including better lighting in the parking lot, clearer emergency procedures posted at every station, and regular safety drills so everyone knew exactly what to do. During my first team meeting, I made it crystal clear that protecting human life always comes before protecting money, and I saw people visibly relax when I said that. One teller told me later that she'd been worried about getting in trouble if she ever had to choose between following rules and keeping someone safe, and knowing I'd been through it and understood made her feel better. My team responded really well to my leadership style because I focused on creating a culture where people felt valued and protected, instead of just being worried about making mistakes. I checked in regularly with each person, made sure they felt comfortable speaking up about problems, and celebrated when they handled difficult situations well. The branch ran smoothly, and I felt proud of the environment we were building together. 2 years after the robbery, I was thriving in my management role, and had been asked to help 3 other branches improve their safety protocols based on what I'd learned. I traveled to each location and spent time training their staff, sharing my story when it felt appropriate, and helping them develop procedures that actually made sense for protecting people. The trauma still surfaced occasionally when I heard loud noises or saw someone who looked like the robbers, but I had healthy ways of dealing with it now, including monthly check-ins with Layla, regular calls with Sam, who remained one of my closest friends, support from my partner who understood when I needed space, and colleagues who respected my experience without treating me like I was fragile. One Tuesday afternoon, I was sorting through mail at my desk when I found a handwritten envelope with my name on it. I opened it and started reading a letter from the young mother whose son had been threatened during the robbery. She wrote that her family was doing well, and her son was now in 2nd grade and doing great in the school. She said he still talks about the brave bank lady who protected them that day, and asks about me sometimes. She wrote that knowing there are people like me in the world makes her feel safer when she goes places with her son, and that she wanted me to know how much my actions meant to her family. Reading her words, I felt something shift inside me as I realized I'd transformed my worst day into a source of ongoing strength and purpose that helps others feel protected and valued.